Fancy, hi Luke, just got some bad news that me and my 36-ish colleagues are not getting our contracts renewed at EA for Apex Legends QA. Back into the void of job searching it is. Oh geez, dude. I feel bad, man. That's terrible. 36 of you guys not getting your contracts renewed. That's crazy. Is it just they didn't renew contracts, or is it that I don't know how EA handles it, but do they just like cycle in new contractors so that they don't have to hire people? Is that what they're just going to do? They're just going to dump you guys, pick up some new guys? That's crazy. I mean, I've heard stories of that where they'll bring contractors on, kind of promise them, yeah, if you do a good job, we'll hire you, totally give you a full-time job here and benefits and all that. And then they just dump all the contractors and bring in new ones. Yeah, LinkedIn is so full of layoffs. Well, it brings to mind this article, and then we can talk about that AC Red leak here in a second. But it brings to mind this, so, because this is almost, like, he brings up almost exactly what you're talking about. So $70 games will go the way of the dodo, believes Saber CEO. The former interim Embracer COO believes developers will move to reduce risk and costs. And what he mentioned specifically, yeah, I think that as games are more expensive to make, the $70 title is going to go the way of the dodo. I just don't think it's sustainable. Look, you remember the hype for Cyberpunk, which I think ultimately performed okay, but when the expectations are so high and so much money is put into one title, it's hugely risky for the company that's doing it. What if it fails? You remember what happened when Ubisoft a couple of years ago, all of their titles slipped out of the year, and then all of a sudden they were in an entirely different place. It's hard to recover from that. I think the market is going to shift development, which is not necessarily lower quality, but there's going to be an emphasis on trying to find ways to reduce costs. With thousands of job cuts announced across the industry in the past 18 months, Karch acknowledged that AAA development is going through a major shift and claimed that the past trends of sky-high budgets and lengthy development periods aren't sustainable. I think that there's going to be a real shortage of game content over the coming few years, he said. You've seen how many layoffs there's been, you've seen how many games have gotten killed, but we have a lot of good projects going on that I'm really proud of, that I feel really, really strongly about. More broadly, the takeaway is that $70 games, which is just a fancy way of saying like AAA, dare I say quadruple A games, they are so expensive to produce now that it's just not really viable. I mean, let me ask you guys this. Nobody Google, I mentioned it on stream like Monday, I think, so some of you might remember it. But how much do you think it cost to develop The Witcher 3 in 2015? How much do you think it cost? Just put your guesses in chat, okay? On Twitch or YouTube, wherever you're watching. I started typing the question into chat or into Google, and it filled in. How much did it cost to develop the atomic bomb? Probably less than Suicide Squad, honestly. 375 million, 60 million, 100 million, 150 million, 170 million. Are we counting development costs? No. And also, here's a question. How long did it take? How much was it? And how long did it take? 10.36 million. Very, very specific. No, just core costs. Because marketing is tricky. If you do you count just the first year of marketing? Do you count 5 years of marketing? Because they've been marketing it for a while. 6 years or something. So here's where I'm going to blow your mind. Okay. It took them 3.5 years to develop The Witcher 3. 3.5 years. That means that if they released The Witcher 2 in 2020, we would have already gotten The Witcher 3. Okay. Like very, very quick turnaround. Okay. And it was self-funded with a budget of $81 million. The standard AAA game in 2024 costs around $300 million and takes 5 to 6 years. Like it's a different world. It's crazy, but it's a different world. Similarly, like let's see, GTA 4 released in 2008 cost an estimated $100 million to put together. 5 years later, GTA 5 cost an estimated 250 to 265 million over 5 years. Massive game, but it also has generated like $10 billion or something insane. It's outrageously successful. And then GTA 6 is estimated to cost between 1 and 2 billion. 1 to 2 billion. So if you look at GTA 4 to 5, we're talking about an increase of like, 2.5 times the price, okay? Going from GTA 5 to GTA 6 we're talking about a cost increase of like 8x. Games are exponentially more expensive now. And there's a few reasons for it. I mean, for one, if you look back at games from 2010, for example, the scope was smaller. So games tended to be a little bit shorter. They tended to have smaller or like less quests. The fidelity was, of course, lower because the hardware was not capable of pumping out 4K 60 whatever crap. And so scopes were smaller, teams were a lot smaller, and they were able to put these games together faster because expectations weren't quite as high. And what's been clear is that as game development has continued to become more complicated, as games have gotten bigger and more ambitious, the number of people and the amount of time needed has gotten exponentially larger. And the two like variables when calculating how much a game costs to make are how many devs and of course how much they're being paid, but multiplied over how much time it takes to develop the game. And the determining factor on how many people you need and how much time you need is the scope and the scale and the vision of the game. Studios have started to think that, okay, well, we just need to go bigger and badder, and then we'll sell more copies, and that will justify bigger teams and more money. But that's not actually proven to be the case. Like, as we've seen, Forspoken was an extremely expensive game to put together. They put just as much money into that as they did with like some of their biggest Final Fantasy games. They expected that to be a huge game and they needed it to be huge, and it flopped catastrophically. Same with Suicide Squad. Suicide Squad, by most accounts, cost probably $200 to $300 million to make. And it has catastrophically flopped as well. And so for a lot of these companies, they just can't justify spending $300 million on a game anymore. So what you're going to see is most likely more live service games that are pumped out faster and cheaper. So smaller in scope, cheaper to make from smaller teams, that type of thing, that are trying to just, make quick and easy money. And then you're also probably going to see fewer big budget games. And I think you're going to see fewer big budget games that are not from established franchises. I don't think you're going to see as many big budget games that are the first in a new IP or something. I don't think you're going to see that very often, if ever. I just don't think you'll see it. Maybe from like a really well-established studio that can sell it. Like if Naughty Dog or Santa Monica Studio want to come out with a new IP, I think that could work because it's from the makers of God of War Ragnarok. I think that finds success. But I don't think you're going to see Ubisoft casually trying to drop like a new Assassin's Creed spin-off or something in a totally new IP. So I think we're going to see a pretty big shift. Yeah, Immortals of Avium is a really good example because Immortals of Avium cost like $125 million. It cost about $80 million to develop. And then EA kicked in $40 million for marketing and distribution. So it cost $125 million to put together, and it also catastrophically flopped. I mean, just nobody really played it. And we pulled it up. I mean, the number of players was crazy low. I mean, it was just nobody was really that interested. But this was a AAA budget new IP from a studio that had never made a game before. And it just didn't really work. And this type of thing, even though this was what some people were like asking for, oh, we need developers to come out with new IP and try something really fresh. When we got it, it just wasn't what it needed to be successful. It came off as very generic, very safe. It had a lot of really weird and cringy writing and stuff, and it just made it really hard to recommend. Even though I think the game is solid. Like if you get it on a sale or something, I think it's a good time. Played it over a weekend. It's not terrible. It's not bad even. Like it's fine, but it's just not worth $70. It's just very clear the gaming industry as it is doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And unfortunately, it's going to result in, even more layoffs, even more canceled projects and stuff. And that's just how it's going to go. Like, where's the money going? I mean, the math isn't that complicated. So the like costs with this are not crazy to calculate. Like if you assume with benefits, with everything else, because it's expensive to have employees, especially in some of these really expensive cities. Like all of these biggest studios are in like Montreal, they're in San Francisco, they're in Paris, like they're in very expensive cities to live and to operate. And so if you imagine, like, you've got €100,000 or US dollar salary and cost for a given employee on average, because some employees are going to make more, some are going to make less. You have to factor in healthcare costs, you have to factor in IRA contributions, you have to factor in their parking spots, you have to factor in the real estate, you have to factor in all of these things. So we say it costs $100,000 per year for an employee, and you have a team of, say, 350 people, and then you also go and spend 5 to 6 years developing, let's just say 5 years, like you're at 175 million right there. And that's with a team of 350 people. And then you have to factor in the costs of contractors that are also helping develop the game. You have to factor in the costs of any sort of leasing or technological tools that you need, new hardware, computers, whatever else. And if it increases by 1 year, that's another $35 million. Like all of a sudden you're crossing the $200 million mark. Like it explodes very, very quickly. Very, very quickly. But my point is, if you're paying them that much, then why isn't the product they produce up to that amount? Why isn't the product they produce up to that amount? I'm not sure what you mean. Yeah. And on top of this, you have to factor in advertising. I mean, for Immortals of Avalon, they spent $40 million. For some of these bigger games, they'll spend $100 million on marketing, all over the place. Who knows how much they spent on Suicide Squad, but they spent a lot on that. So, you add in another 50 million on marketing, all of a sudden you have $250 million invested in a AAA game that only 350 people put together over the course of 5 years. And that's not that crazy nowadays. That's really not. The Witcher 4 is being put together by about 400 people with contractors and everything. But if you do a similar thing where, not $1 million a person, if you do a similar thing where it's like on average 100 grand, and then you also factor in, over, I think it's 407. So we'll just say like 410 maybe. And then we say they work on that for 5 years. Like all of a sudden we're there. They probably spend 100 million on marketing. They probably also have contractors, extra stuff that they do. You're over $250 million for one video game from one team. And this is why they need $70 a copy. This is why they need, they need that extra $5 DLC that launches on day one. They need you to buy the season pass. They need to do all of this stuff. It's because that's the only way you can get here and cover those costs. Because if you say that all told it costs, let's just say $300 million to make something, if you just divide by full price, which not everybody's buying it at full price, and each of these stores is taking 30%, you still need to sell over 4 million copies to break even, right? But more likely, if you say for $70, there's at least a third that's taken from like off the top for processing fees, for PlayStation's cut, for whatever. You're only getting, let's just say $45 with taxes and everything. Let's say $40. It might even be closer to 40, honestly. But if we do that like 300 million and then divide that by $45 of effective money coming in when it's selling on consoles and everything else on average, you got to sell over 6.5. You got to sell the devil's number of copies. Like this is why it's just not really sustainable. And so there's other ways you can do it by selling a $10 DLC with a skin that costs you $5,000 to put together with a team. You put that together, you sell it for $5 or $10. That's pure profit straight back in. And all of a sudden this number of sales needed to break even drops precipitously. But this is why even at $70, the math doesn't really math super well. Spider-Man 2 costs $300 million. Yeah. And this is why, like, when I see those comments from people that are saying, this is ridiculous, they charge $70 for these games, how are they not profitable? It's because there really are not that many people buying games at full price anymore. Part of it is because the quality is in question. And $70 is a lot of freaking money for almost every person on the planet. Like, that's a lot of money to spend on a game that might be good. Might. And even if it is pretty good, if it's coming from like a Ubisoft or an EA, you just wait 2 months and it's half off. Yeah, doesn't Marvel take a stupid amount of a cut? Yeah. Like, say if it sells on PlayStation takes 30%. And then from there, it's like, okay, well, what does Marvel take? Marvel takes like a third as well. All of a sudden, you're only making like $25, $30 a copy. And then, you know, this equation gets a lot tougher. If you say $300 million it costs to put together and market and everything, and you're only making like $25 a copy, you got to sell 12 million copies to break even. And that's a lot. Not many games in their lifetime do 12 million copies. And we're talking, you know, that's if you're selling at full price after all the cuts from the participants and stakeholders. It's not that simple. You know, so this is why these executives say it's not sustainable, because a really successful game might do, you know, 1 million, 2 million copies at launch. And then it might take, you know, over the course of the next few years when it goes on sale, it might do another 1 million or 2 million copies. Like, it just really is not that sustainable. Realistically, for these AAA games to be more stable, like say at 300 million copy or $300 million, if each copy were selling for $100, which is why they have all of these extra editions, the gold edition for 110, and then the ultra edition for 125 or whatever it is. If it averages out to like $100, PlayStation, Xbox, Steam, they take 30% off the top. So let's say you're actually making $70 on each sale. Then this number is much more manageable for like a huge game, especially if you're also able to sell like a $10 DLC or a season pass for another $10 or $20 or whatever else they can do. But like, this is a lot of freaking copies. This is a lot. It's just the math is really tough to work out on this scale. And what's the solution? I mean, we can look back at something like The Witcher 3 and be like, wow, it only cost $80 million to make The Witcher 3, and it's great. It's awesome. But also, like, it was a smaller team, and because cost of living was lower and globally when this game was made, you didn't have to pay employees as much, but now cost of living is very expensive. So you have to pay them living wages. And especially if you want world-class talent, which is what you need to make a world-class game, you have to pay them well, offer them benefits and stuff. And that's what brings the initial variable up, which is how much you pay each employee and how many employees you have. And then the time it takes is managed by the scope. And if gamers are saying, no, I don't want to buy a game that's only 20 hours long, like a lot of people complain about Spider-Man being short because we've become accustomed to full price games being like 20, 30, 40 hours long. So it's like, oh, it's only 15 hours long and it costs $70. I'll just wait till it's on sale. All of a sudden, the game isn't profitable if you're going to wait for a sale. Like, it just doesn't work out like that, you know? RS NOS, why are costs so high? Like, why does it cost $100 million to produce? Take away marketing and paying employees and voice actors. I mean, it's just, like I said, it's just a function of a bunch of different variables that have all stacked up all at the same time. For one, scope is big. Gamers want big games. Two, cost of living globally has skyrocketed thanks to crazy inflation. And as a result, in every industry, they have to pay employees more to be able to live while making games. And so because they have to pay them more, that brings that cost up even more. And everything just kind of starts to cascade down where like, this is why inflation's a problem. This is why when costs of goods start going up over here for like food, costs of everything else start to go up too, because it's like, okay, well, now your video games, the developers have to spend more money to survive. So we have to pay them more. And in order to pay them more, we have to make more. And in order to make more, we have to charge more. But in order to charge more, we need to have a bigger scope and make the value proposition better. And in order to do that, we have to work for longer, which makes this more expensive to produce. So we have to find other ways of making money to pay for all of this. And so you just end up with things getting more and more expensive, and it just snowballs. Like, it's why during COVID, everything seemed great, you know, when interest rates were zero and it seemed like money was free because they were just printing money to pay for everything and keep the economy of the world going. But eventually the bill comes due, and that's where we're at now. Like, money isn't free. If you print endless money, eventually it catches up with you. It takes a couple years historically, and that's what we've seen now, is that it's caught up to everybody, and now everybody's acting shocked at what happened. It's like, yeah, you thought printing stimmy checks was just gonna like happen. It wasn't, mainly, to be clear, it wasn't just the stimmy checks. It was the hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars that they spend keeping corporations afloat, and then also like funding a war and lots of stuff like that. But still, like, free money doesn't exist. It's eventually the bill comes due. I think costs can be reduced the moment studios realize graphics aren't everything. All of these $300 million games are trying to push the boundaries in graphical fidelity. But even then, like, the games that we've seen aren't particularly beautiful or shocking. Like, performance seems to be a big problem with a lot of these games, and they still don't even look particularly great to warrant technical problems in performance. Like, Dragon's Dogma 2 is not a particularly gorgeous game. It has moments where it's really pretty and where things look really good, but it doesn't run very well at all. So, but I mean, that's just one example, right? So who knows? I think just with a lot of this, it's a mixture of a ton of different things. I think gamers have gotten really spoiled because we got a lot of really solid games through the PS4 generation that were huge, big budget games from PlayStation, and that worked for PlayStation for a while, but now I think they're realizing that that's not sustainable as the rest of things scale up, because people don't expect to just get more PS4 games. They expect PS5 grade games, and that brings expectations up. And in order to meet those, they have to also have bigger scope, and games have to look better. And there's just so many things that follow from that. So they've kind of worked themselves into a corner a bit. Not everyone is a pixel art fan, and some of these players, like FIFA players, really demand high-tech graphics for their games. If EA dares to lower graphics even a bit, players will riot. Yeah, I mean, it's just, with all this, it's just a mixture of expectations and costs. And the thing about, like, finance is that the numbers are the numbers. And, like, as you can see here, you just pull out a calculator, you run some basic numbers, and you start to see the problem. It's easy to just go, oh, it's corporate greed at the end of the day. There is certainly corporate greed going on at a lot of these companies, to be clear. But at its core, the problems in the gaming industry are mainly to do with the core economics of scale when it comes to game development. It's just that scope is too large, teams are seemingly too large, and games are too expensive to produce in a way that's actually profitable. You can charge $70 for a game, but you still need 4 or 5 million copies to sell. And gamers don't want to buy full priced games because everything's so expensive now and quality is up in the air. So there's, like, they have to then find other ways to make money. So they start selling DLC day one. They start having upgradable versions, the deluxe, the ultra, the gold editions, and trying to find ways to make the game more profitable that way. That's why, like, I agree, like, the corporate greed thing is just, I think it is woefully reductionistic, and you miss out on the core problem in the industry when you just boil it down to, well, you know, whatever, it's corporate greed. It's like, no, there's a much bigger problem in the gaming industry right now, and it's one that's not going to go away just by cutting Yves Guillemot's income or salary, which I don't even know if he makes a salary. I think most of his wealth is in stock. Like, even if you got rid of salaries paid out to executives, it's not going to put a dent in the core issue here. And part of it is, you know, there's other problems more broadly within corporate, not just America, but globally, international business, where growth is the end all be all. And a lot of games have stopped growing. The game industry has stopped growing for this year. It looks like it's not going to grow much at all. If anything, it might shrink a little bit. So that's a huge problem because it's really hard to argue why you should spend $200 million on a project if the industry is shrinking a bit. You know, that's bad. But it's because there's been a lot of games that have come out of questionable quality and that still cost full price. And so people are going to not buy it. It's not rocket science, but it's going to have some cascading effects for years to come. I think, like I said, smaller projects, we're going to get less big budget projects. And I mean, even now, like, I just pulled up the YouTube homepage. You can see Asmongold has a video, and he's looking at the different editions of Star Wars Outlaws. And the whole premise of the video is, this is why people pirate games. That's the title of it. And here's the deal. Like, as we outlined, this game will probably need to do 4 million copies to break even. That's a lot. Probably more than that because it's a licensed game, so Disney's taking a cut. And as we know, Disney takes a lot. So they probably need to sell more like 8 to 10 million copies. And that's assuming you sell them at full price, $70. So they have additional editions at 110, 130. And they do that because that brings down the total number of copies that are needed to sell to break even. But the average gamer response is that, no, this is insane. This is why we should pirate the games. Not just not buy them at launch, but to pirate them, to download them without giving a penny to the developers. And so, yeah, you shouldn't be surprised when these games go away entirely, which maybe that's your ultimate goal. Maybe you just don't want to see games like this produced at all. But you shouldn't be shocked when AAA game dev turns even more desperate, bigger, like higher priced editions become more normalized when less and less of these games come out. Like, I understand it's kind of the pop culture knee-jerk reaction to just go, oh yeah, this game should flop because they're charging so much for it. But hopefully now you can at least understand why they have to charge all of that, because there's no way for it to break even at the end of the day. And that's why I don't think you're going to see another game like Star Wars Outlaws. That's why they're moving away from it. They're not doing another one. After this, they're going to the Division 3 because it just doesn't make sense to do it anymore. You're going to announce this and then people are going to freak out, call for the game to be canceled. And so the devs are going to be like, okay, well, we're just going to go work on another live service game. Gamers are getting older and a lot of them don't have the time to put into a 100-hour game. Yeah, no, and I think that's why we're going to see more games that are coming out at like a 10, 15-hour range, which used to be a pretty normal thing. You used to have full-priced games in like 2010, 2008 even, where the whole campaign is 10 hours long, 15 hours long. Yeah, that's the reason for more microtransactions. Old gamers don't have the time, but they do have the money. Yeah, I mean, I do think unironically that's a big part of it. When they say that like, oh yeah, gamers want XP boosts in the next Assassin's Creed game because they don't have the time to spend 100 hours in the game. So we give them an option to basically pay $5 or $10 to skip a lot of that. And on its face, it is hilarious to pay money to play less of a thing you bought. That is really funny. It's just, it really doesn't make sense, but it's a reaction to a problem that a lot of people do have, which is that these games are massive and they're made massive to appeal to a certain demographic of people that want more bang for the buck, but they also sell a solution to them being so massive to people that takes the form of giving them a way to skip gameplay, which is just funny. It's just funny. He took my thing.